Okay, so here we are on the start of the second game turn. This is the afternoon of the 26th of January. I said the 25th yesterday, actually got that wrong. This western arm of the Russian pincer kicked off 24 hours later than the eastern arm, so it only kicked off on the 26th of January. So we're on the second part of the turn. The Germans have received some very slight reinforcements. Flieger Corps 7 has received a squadron of Ju-87s to its available air sorties. Nothing for the Russians. For the Germans also we've received a bridging unit, but I don't think that's going to sway the battle. All right, we've done Russians' initial movement, and I'll just show you what we've done here. So here on the left flank we've now committed the 337th Infantry Division to put some pressure on these two dug-in German units on this hill. They weren't able to shift them last turn, and as you can see that 180th unit took quite a lot of casualties, but we've got a lot of emplaced artillery still that have those hills in range. So we're going to just continue to put pressure on them and try and weaken them. While the main thrust on the left of the penetration is carried out by the 180th. They've pushed one unit in the German line back. They're busily trying to re-dig in, but the 180th are going to keep pressure up and try and push that penetration forward, and they've disengaged some units on their right flank to do that. As we move across here, we've got a more major penetration going on. You can see 3 German units trying to dig in. They were all pushed back last turn, and the 160th and the 359th pushing hard to try and make a gap in the centre of the 198th Division. Otherwise, the Russians are keeping up pressure on the right again, mainly to use all their artillery that's in place on the right flank. So we've now committed the 74th and the 133rd to keep the German units occupied and they can't redeploy, trying to pin them in place, and similarly with the 58th. We've got some Russian artillery that isn't in range here, so we'll move them out of battery in a second, and then we'll move on to the next stage of the Russian turn. Okay, so we've completed Russian movement. You can see we've got a whole lot of artillery in column markers here, so a bunch of our Katyusha batteries have gone. Actually, I need to check Katyushas aren't self-propelled. I will just check that, but given these are heavy artillery, we flip them out of battery, and then to move, they have to move in column. So they've moved into column mode and moved forward behind the front lines. The rest of the artillery broadly is in range. For the Germans, we're going to try some final protective fire this time because our defensive barrages didn't prove that effective. I've also spotted that heavy artillery with extra supply doesn't double its combat effect, so we'll try and get that right this turn as well. Okay, we'll start left to right, and we'll start with some combat with the 337th, and I'll come back and show you how it's all played out. Okay, so we've done the Russian assaults, not massively successful without that vast amount of artillery support. So over here, those 2 units on the left flank holding the hill, we were unable to push back. In the centre, some progress. We've pushed back that Stug unit to extending the slight penetration here, but not shifted that little shoulder of units to the right. In the centre, we continue to push back and make an opening with the undug-in German units being pushed backable by our Russian infantry without heavy artillery support. But again, we're moving even out of long-range artillery support here, so the firepower of the Russian infantry will be dying away. Perhaps time next turn to commit to the 5th Mechanized Corps. And over on the right, again, no real progress. The German line remains pretty much intact, although here most of these units have been pushed out of their dug-in positions. So continued reasonable progress for the Russians, but nothing spectacular. Right, now for the second turn for the Germans. Right, so the Germans completed their move, no attacks. They used some of their artillery to, again, conduct any compulsory attacks against any Russian units. Otherwise, most of their units are either in villages or built-up areas, so they're not, they're lifted from the requirement to attack enemy units that are adjacent to them. What we got going on here, well, the Germans have pulled back and they're trying to dig in again. We've still got this little salient to the 198th that looks in quite a strong position. I'm slightly worried about them being cut off as the Russians continue to push up in the centre. But again, Germans still trying to dig in there, having been pushed out of some of their units, some of their positions, and we've just moved another of our assault gun battalions, another battalion of Stugs, up towards the centre of this Russian breakthrough. Feels like game turn the goal, the start of the 27th, as when we get to the next daytime game turn, will be key as we see what the Russians do with their armoured units to try and drive this breakthrough that may be appearing in the centre. Germans still hanging in there. That's it. End of turn 2. Really not sure if that night turn was worth it for the Russians. We've got a reasonable breakthrough here, but some of our supporting units have been thrown back. We've got our unit that was trying to complete the encirclement, so we do have zones of control all around these 3 units, so they are out of supply for the start of the German turn. But we are also ourselves out of supply, and we are unable to destroy the artillery unit next to us, and the Russian forces were not able to break through to us. Over here, some minor pushbacks, but quite a lot of casualties taken by the Russians. Right, that's the end of the Russians for the first day of the battle. Final turn for the Germans. Alright, so for this night turn, I think the priorities for the Germans will be to try and relieve those cut-off units and re-establish contact with them, potentially wipe out those Russian units that are performing that action, and again try and stabilise the front line. But so far so good, but still 5th Mechanised Corps to hit at the beginning of tomorrow morning. Alright, let's do those moves. So by combining all of their artillery from the 7th Corps and the 198th Division and the Stugs with the armour superiority they gave the Germans, they were able to overrun that Russian position, and they have re-established a line of supply to their units. Alright, this feels like a critical turn for the Russians. It's 27th of January now. It's frosty, it's clear, and there's good visibility. So time for them to go all in on the attack. Perhaps now is the time to unleash the 5th Mechanised Corps. As you can see, actually, we have a 5th Mechanised Corps reconnaissance unit right at the front line. Let's see what we can do as we try and drive this breakthrough. Okay, here we are after movement on the start of the 27th of January game turn. So second full day for the Russians, and we're throwing our 5th Mechanised Corps and our air forces, some Sturmoveks and some light bombers into action. Okay, just doing a quick recap on the left flank. The 337th continues its pressure with its little breakthrough on the border between the 198th and the 88th Division. 180th is licking its wounds. It lost 2 battalions from the counterattack by the 905th Stug Battalion, plus the engineers and infantry battalions of the 326th and the 305th, which allowed them to clear that forward penetration by the 180th, so they're a bit weakened. The 198th here have had their supply lines reconnected. So they do have a zone of control running through their own zones of control, their own fortified area, back through Artonovka to the German lines, but probably time to pull them back. And here's the key decision. The 5th Mechanised Corps has hit the front lines. They did a passenger lines overnight, and they've crashed into the front of this German position. Not much artillery support for these attacks, so they've thrown in their air force this time. Let's see how we can do. Can we secure the armoured breakthrough on the 198th Infantry Division's front? This really is a make or break time. Okay, we'll show you some of the combats this time. We're going to start over here as we're assaulting this unit which was trying to dig in. I think, yeah, it's an anti-tank unit without any infantry support. It's facing off against an assault again by a brigade from the 337th. Supporting it, we've got 2 rocket artillery batteries and the 337th own organic artillery. There's no offensive fire supply this turn, so everything's back to normal ammunition supply. But again, those anti-tank guns aren't dug in, so they won't get any protection against this artillery. So what we got 2 units of 6 offensive barrage points. Let's see if we want to do any defensive barrage first by the Germans. I'll just have a think. Okay, so we don't have much artillery available. We do have the 88th Infantry Division's own artillery just to the rear, so we're going to use that as final protective fire. so we're not going to do any firing by the Germans. We could do counter battery fire from the Russians, but I think we'd rather put it all into the straight attack, as that German artillery is in a town hex as well, so somewhat shielded from the counter battery shots. All right, let's see how this combat goes. So we got 12, 13, 14, 15 points of artillery firing against that anti-tank battery, and I think we'll have 9 points here. Yeah, 9, 10, 11, 12, 24 points of attack strength against a defense strength of 8. We'll do our final protective fire. That makes that an attack strength of defense strength of 9 now, which helps get a shift of 1 in the German favour. So that goes from 3 to 1 down to 2 to 1, but we do have divisional combat, as I think we have more than one unit of the 131st here. Yep, 2, indeed 3 battalions of the 131st Regiment. So that goes back to +3. Let's see how the Germans do. Russians do, sorry. And another appalling dice roll, 6. And I think on a 3 to 1, that will be no effect or even a negative result. Yep, the Russians have to pull back 1 square. Okay, so off camera we fired some artillery from these, some of these rocket batteries on the front line were still available, and we've used some from the 40th Army Reserve. We did towards a couple of retreat results, so the engineers have retreated out of that fortified area, and the unit that was in that square there has also retreated to make a stack of 3 in the centre of that fortified area. So Germans, I'm sure, will pull back from that this turn, possibly actually helped by those retreats from the Russian artillery fire. All right, we're going to start with the 5th Mechanised now. So the 1/827th Armoured Regiment are going to go in against the 2nd Battalion, 308th. They're in a village, so that gives them a 2 combat modifier shift to the left. We get 4 combat shift modifiers to the right because of our armour strength, so that takes it to +2. Then we lose 1 of those because there's an anti-tank value of 1 in there. So this will be an attack value of 7 against a defence strength of 6, 1 shift to the right. So that'll be 2 to 1. And we roll a 6, more not great rolling for the Russians. A 6 on 2 to 1 is the attacker take 1 loss and have to retreat 1 step. Right, next major combat. So against a unit that hasn't managed to complete its fortification, so we took the dug-in fortification marker in progress off. We've got 21 points of attacking Russians with an armour shift of 3, going against 6 in the defensive, so that's 3 to 1. 4 to 1, 5 to 1 because of the net armour shift of 2, but back down to 3 to 1 because of the village defensive modifiers, but then we got an airstrike as well, so this will be 4 to 1. Again, another not great roll for the Russians, despite having good results. So on 4 to 1 or 5 is a defender has to retreat 1 hex or take a step loss. That'll take them out of the village, but I think we're going to take the retreat to kind of try and keep our units intact. All right, we'll now move across and do the next assault and come back after we finish the 5th Guard Mechanised Assault. Okay, so a more oppressive assault phase from the Russians here. So continuing to press this little left flank attack, not much progress. 180th has just held in place and its artillery is deploying. 167th again held in place and deploying its artillery. We did attack with the 1827th, as you saw, made no progress. But then up here, the 233rd and the 52nd Sherman equipped 5th Mechanised units pushed back the 2nd 158th, and the 46th and the 156th of the 9th and 45th Mechanised Corps or Mechanised Regiments pushed back this assault gun and the infantry with it. And then on the far right flank, the 745th Heavy Tank Regiment with the 359th Infantry Division pushed back the Stugs on the right flank, and we potentially are very close to a breakthrough in the centre here. The Germans are still just about covering the line, but gaps are starting to appear. And tough one for the Germans. They've got to decide what to do next as they regroup in the morning turn of the 27th. Okay, just trying this video without the lights on. It's late in the afternoon here, but we got some reasonable brightness in the room. so no reflections this time. So what's happened this time? So the Germans have moved to reoccupy these two fortified squares and brought some of the 88th across to try and prevent this penetration. Over as we move across here, the Germans are pulled back behind this river line and strengthen their position. Still looks like the most dangerous Soviet penetration is by the 5th Mechanised Corps, which are driving all before it. Haven't quite performed a clean breakthrough, but look like they're well on the way. We do have some potent German reserves moving forward. The 506th Heavy Tiger Battalion, or Heavy Tank Battalion, I presume with Tigers in it, is moving up from the 3rd Panzer Army, so the first reinforcements from the 3rd Panzer Army to try and prevent this breakthrough and moving into position. I'm sure the 5th Tank Corps will now move up and try and further extend this breach that the Mechanised Corps has successfully triggered in the first place. All right, on with the second element, the second phase, the afternoon of the 27th of January. Hi guys, now moving on to the afternoon turn for the 27th of January, and I've realised the 506th Heavy Panzer Battalion, I've moved them back to the map edge, doesn't come on till this turn, so they shouldn't have moved onto the table last turn. Alright, time for the Russians. Let's see if they can continue this exploitation. Hi guys, so we're at the end of the 27th afternoon game turn. Some reasonable progress for the Russians here. So the 5th Mechanised Corps has pretty much penetrated as far as this village of Karchenkov, which used to have a huge cluster of German units in it, mainly non-combat. So we had the 7th Corps Artillery and 7th Corps headquarters there, as well as a construction battalion. They've all had to evacuate across the river, and they managed to get themselves caught in a little bend of the river here. So these two units, the artillery and the main headquarters, have both had to abandon all their vehicles and wade across the river, or swim across the river, or find small boats to carry themselves across the river. And so they've lost all their transport, but they have escaped the Russian penetration. It looks like the left flank of the German position is forming up against this river line, and those units are all digging in, and they'll probably be all right. And again, penetration attacks by the 180th and the 337th are still not getting anywhere, still being held up on these fortified positions here. And with the artillery, heavy artillery pulling away now, it looks like they won't make much more progress. They've just taken quite a lot of casualties. But 5th Mechanised Corps has got now a 10-mile penetration, and actually has a clear way forward, but has no bridging units up with it, so it can't get across the river there. So it'll have to swing east with the second element of the breakthrough. Again, not quite achieved a decisive victory. It had 10-1 odds or 9-1 odds on one of its attacks and managed to roll a 6. So failed to destroy that still good company that it was facing off against it. So still not quite a clean breakthrough for them, and they can't go charging forward, but still doing fairly well. And they have they're all in supply, so they have Russian supply roads all the way up to the front line. On this eastern flank, we're continuing to apply pressure here. They've still got some of the heavy artillery in place and are pushing the Germans back, so starting to widen the breach. The Germans have started to get some elements of the 3rd Panzer Corps arriving, but still not in sufficient numbers to make any difference. And the rest of the units that were gathered around the river were all artillery batteries of medium and heavy caliber. They've all formed up and pulled out now to try and find new defensive positions. Might try and find some on the Corps artillery anyway, on the south side of this penetration, see if they can get away from this potential encirclement. All right, very active stuff here, and we'll move on to the 27th night turn, see whether the Russians continue their penetration attack. Okay, so we're moving out into the evening phase, and the Russians are continuing to shift right to try and drive their breakthrough towards their cut-off units down here, and continuing to drive eastward, securing their left flank on this river line. 5th Mechanised Corps is caught up around this stuck battalion that's in defence, but it's probably going to get overwhelmed, although the Russians have no artillery supports for their attacks. They're also pushing the Stuka company that was holding out last turn and attacking down the whole eastern flank to try and broaden their penetration. On the left, they've moved more over to the defensive. Right, let's see how the early evening goes as the Russians continue to drive this penetration. Okay, so here we are at the end of the 27th of January game turn. The position is clarifying and it looks like the Russians have got their breakthrough. They had some real successes up here as they advanced. They managed to trap a couple of German units against the river. And although they weren't eliminated in combat, they had to retreat through a combination of Russian zones of control and then up against the river and weren't able to cross as it was two assault gun units. So that was bad news for the Germans, and those two units got eliminated, first eliminations. And as you can see up here, we very much just on the point of reaching our cut-off Russian forces in the village over here, and have achieved a breakthrough, although we have a marshy stream to cross, which could be a little bit difficult, but Russians have got access to some crossing points further away from the main river on the left. Germans have started pulling back, the 198th now. There was a threat, certainly down here, there still is a threat that they're going to get cut and caught against the river. We need to free up some engineers to put a bridge over to potentially extract our artillery, so that will be a priority. And we're moving one of the 3rd Panzer's recently arrived engineering units down to potentially put a bridge across the river here to allow us to pull that artillery back. We still hold some fortified positions, but the Russians have pretty much captured all of our right flank. Over on the left, the 198th, unlike in history, which took serious losses, has mainly survived the breakthrough, but now is holding the left flank of this river. Most of those units are back in, dug in or fortified positions, as a lot of the Russian infantry has exhausted itself in its offensive firepower, and all of the Russian heavy artillery there has now been withdrawn as the offensive, or the early days of the offensive, are complete and has been withdrawn, and with the intention of being redeployed, I guess, elsewhere in the front. So lots of artillery. You can see all these column markers here moving up, but very little Russian artillery now in range. They can still hit the flanks with this heavy artillery grouping down here. Super heavy artillery batteries can just about reach this flank and this flank, but it's right at the extremity of their range now. So the Russian attack is pretty much without artillery support, but it's got its breakthrough. All right, we'll see whether the Germans can do anything to plug this hole. They don't really have any units to do that. All of their infantry is pretty much committed to holding the flanks, so they'll be dependent on reserves coming on and see what difference those can make. In addition to the 5th Mechanised, we've also got the 5th Guards tank now deployed. Took some losses, but was instrumental in driving this line of German units that are now busily trying to dig in again on this river line to try and hold this southern flank of the penetration. All right, I hope you've enjoyed the game, and I'll see you probably for a new video as we move into turn 3 on the 28th of January.